Looks like we're live. Hi, everybody. Joe Moore here. I am the co-founder and CEO of Psychedelics. Today, I'm here with an amazing panel. Really excited. So today, we are joined by an all-star cast. Rachel Yehuda, Rick Doblin, Robin Carhart-Harris, and Matt Johnson. And I'm just extraordinarily excited to dig into this topic around where does science and industry meet? And what's the good and the bad here? And how can we make the best of this partnership? Because it's essential. It's a really key partnership. So I'm trying to see if everybody else is here. Yes. Hi, everybody. Robin, Matt Johnson, Rick Doblin. Rachel might be working on an internet issue, but hopefully she can join us shortly. This is a really interesting topic, fraught with many complicated discussions and interesting angles. One of the most interesting ones, Rick, is kind of MAPS's anti-patent strategy. Yeah. And I'm curious if you can talk about that and how that might relate to this kind of debate around science and industry.
Okay. Well, the anti-patent strategy is anti-use patents. So I'm not in general opposed to patents for original inventions, but the use of psychedelics for psychotherapy for different conditions, much of that has already been in the public domain. And so those are overbroad patents in many cases. And when I started MAPS in '86 as nonprofit, another group started a company called NDA International that was for ibogaine. And it was going to be for profit. And they had a use patent on ibogaine for opiate addiction. Eventually, they got use patents for other sorts of addictive behaviors, different drugs and alcohol. But then what happened is there proceeded to be a bunch of lawsuits between the company and Deborah Mash, who was doing work, but they didn't fully fund her, and she patented the long-lasting metabolite. And then this whole field was destroyed for a while, for decades, by these crossing patent litigation. And so what's happened now is that those patents have expired, but there's new patents that Deborah Mash has gotten. But in any case, that's when I contacted the attorney for the use patent for ibogaine, and I said I want an anti-patent strategy so nobody could patent the uses of MDMA. And now there's other groups forming a collaborative to put in the easily accessible to patent examiners what's the prior art. So Compass has been criticized for trying to patent the form of psychotherapy. They say that they're just trying to do that for their particular branch of psilocybin. They're not trying to block other people from using psychotherapy. But I think the idea for us is that as much as possible, we want things in the public domain, and particularly we're against overbroad patents, but I'm not against the for-profit industry or patenting original inventions.
Well, thank you for that, Rick. Robin, this next one's for you. And this is showing that science and industry aren't too much in conflict or entirely different, right? The platform that you're working on, Psychedelic, and another platform that most of us should know about, 𝗹𝘀𝗆𝗆, are examples of that kind of business projects, but with really interesting implications for industry and science. And I'm curious if you can kind of maybe speak to how you see this balance between science and industry.
Yeah, I mean, so far so good. Personally, Psychedelic evolved out of the research and was motivated by the research. So naturalistic observational research is something we've been doing for about 4.5 years or so at Imperial. Granted, I'm now at UCSF, but and so that ability to prospectively track people across time, the natural sort of thought was an app could do that better. And so that was the initial motivation. And it just transpires that maybe there's a business model there. That's a bonus. And that can help fund the thing. And I think in Mendel's case with 𝗹𝘀𝗆𝗆, again, his PhD, he was allowed to explore and find what was a particularly good fit for him. Music and how it interfaces with psychedelics very much fitted his interests, and so it evolved that became his startup with 𝗹𝘀𝗆𝗆. So it's been very natural so far. I don't feel conflicted. That might sound terribly naive, but I feel like an inquirer, like I did, several years ago. Others may judge differently, but
Right, right. And Rachel, hearing this, I'm curious if you have any kind of comments before I ask you another question more about the federal funding angle.
Oh, thank you. Walking into this conversation a few minutes late. But I think that working with industry is very important for academics. I don't think it should be an academic's entire portfolio, but I think not working with industry might yield difference in the field in academia than if academics do work in collaboration with industry. And, I do maps, I mean, are bringing compounds for FDA approval. That is something that academics, we don't own, generally speaking, so really requires a partnership. So, I mean, this is a session about academic and industry partners. What I worry about is who we're leaving out of these conversations when we just restrict the partnerships to academics and industry, because who are the other consumers and who are the other people that should.
Looks like we might have lost Rachel there, but I get what she's saying here about who are we leaving out of the conversation. I recall in academia, there was my experience with it. There was always a debate between industry and the academics, and would an academic make a great person in industry? It's debatable. Now, I'm really interested in this idea of federal funding, and Matt, maybe this one can go to you. And the idea is, are we getting much federal dollars or government dollars for psychedelic research at this point? And, do we need funding from private groups and individuals in place of that?
So right now, currently, the field really is in the United States is not receiving substantial or really much at all federal funding. It depends on how you define the question. Very little to no federal funding for therapeutic research with compounds like MDMA and psilocybin. And so, a while back, the directors of NIH and FDA were presented with an inquiry from a senator's office, and they responded. It was largely a positive response, but said, yes, this is exciting, and look at the work we've funded on ketamine. And I think there was also some allusion to like funding for MDMA. Of course, the vast majority of that MDMA research over the last 30 years or so has been about its potential toxic properties, not about therapeutic applications in humans. Mm-hmm. And so, so you narrow it down to the two leading, compounds, MDMA and psilocybin. There's essentially no NIH, which is the entity that's likely going to be funding this in the United States. Essentially no research. They're supposedly open, but I haven't seen evidence of this. I've caught wind that they funded one sort of training award, a so-called K award. I believe this was NIMH, the Mental Health Institute, but as far as I know, they've yet to fund an R-level grant, sort of a large standard grant on the therapeutic use. They have funded some basic research questions, more geared towards harms of psilocybin, or use of psilocybin as a comparator to other drugs, looking at harms. So I don't think we're there yet. Recently, the Drug Abuse Institute passed by a grant that I had that was actually the best best score from NIH I've gotten in my scientific career. It was a nearly perfect score, and I've been applying for grants for 15 years, and have gotten plenty of them. And this is did the best job with the actual scientists reviewing it, but the Drug Abuse Institute passed over it. So, and these are all, these are individual institutes that are making their decisions. There's recently been a positive sign from Francis Collins. There was a little bit of publicity about him saying some positive things about psilocybin and MDMA. There's a hope that'll trickle down. I think it's going to be within the next couple of years, probably. But frankly, it's not necessary. It would be very good for the field if there was NIH funding. It would really complement what philanthropists are interested in, and now more recently what industry is interested in.
Yeah, and Rick, maybe this is a good transition for you. I've heard you comment that private funding has somewhat decreased since all of these public companies have hit the scene, and you're seeing, I guess, a decrease in philanthropic donations and more of a private interest. And I'm kind of curious of your thoughts on what that looks like, or what are the implications of that?
Yeah, well, various of these for-profit companies stocks have gone up 500 to 1,000% in a very short amount of time. And so what we're seeing is a lot of people are saying to us, why should we donate? Now we can invest. How is a public benefit nonprofit model any different than a for-profit model? So that's on us to try to demonstrate why they should still donate and how we'll do things differently. Then the other thing is, the closer that we've gotten to success, now we have one successful phase 3 study, and it looks a lot like our second phase 3 study will work as well. Now people are saying you can have an income stream. Now it looks like you might actually be able to sell MDMA for a profit through your public benefit corp and make some money. So now, why should we donate? We'll just loan you the money, and you can pay us back from your sales. And of course, if you don't succeed for whatever reason, you won't have to pay us back. But we are finding it very challenging now in this, for-profit environment to receive the donations that we need. And at the same time, our ambitions have grown, so that what we want to do is we want to globalize, we want to commercialize, and we want to reach a sustainability point for our roughly 125 people now working at MAPS and the Public Benefit Corp. That'll happen, we think, in the middle of 2024, when we earn enough from the sale of MDMA by prescription, assuming, of course, insurance coverage. And so what we're actually embarking on is a $150 million fundraise, $50 million a year for 3 years to, as I said, reach the sustainability point, commercialize, which could itself cost $70 or $80 million just in the US prior to launch of the product. That's what pharma would spend, and then 35-40 million to go to Europe and around the world. So yes, our ambitions have increased at a time when it's more difficult to raise philanthropy.
I closely identify with that, Rick. Yeah, it's an important thing to be aware of, and yeah, scale is really important here. So many people are going to need help in the coming, well, they need help now, but even more in 10 years. So we've got to really prepare. So thank you for that. And Robin, this question would be for you. I hope everybody's okay with this clockwise approach. And please feel free to ask each other questions, and I'm hoping to pull comments up from the audience once I see them. So if the staff could just throw questions in our private chat here, that would be helpful, because I'm not seeing any in the other feed. So Robin, do you have an idea of what an ideal relationship would look like between a university/public research group and a for-profit entity, trying to finance for their own, private interests?
Well, in some senses, I've argued before that the best type of funding, in a sense, for a researcher is philanthropy, because it gives the greatest degree of freedom to explore. If you're writing a government funding body grant, you typically kind of water it down, or at least from experience, negative experience, not winning those grants. I've been told things like, this is too early, psilocybin for anorexia, psilocybin for chronic pain, it's too it's too early. It's so frustrating because, you know, a number of teams that are doing that now. We're doing it now, as well as Hopkins, 𝗙𝗪𝗪𝗵 for anorexia. It's going very well. And so that kind of daring, kind of, you know, leading edge stuff, difficult to get funded by government funding. It's easy to, you know, to attack in some ways those really explorative, inventive designs. And so philanthropy gives you the freedom. So our New England Journal of Medicine article, the 𝗙𝗪𝗪𝗵 versus 𝗪𝗪citabine, was funded entirely by philanthropy, and it gave us the freedom to do something, you know, a bit different that is, I think, really, you know, put the cat amongst the pigeons, has really created some further questions now about psilocybin therapy for depression versus a leading first-line intervention. So I guess freedom to publish is one thing, without any constraints, the kind of agendas that just naturally come in because you've got a company, you've got a budget, you've got to, you know, make sure all the sums work out and you're going to be profitable, and all those pressures. And so those pressures work as constraints, and constraints are the last thing you want, really, as an inquirer, as a scientist. So freedom, in a word, is the kind of relationship. And of course, you know, a company is going to want something, but it can be a kind of happy trade, where you can get your findings out in the public domain, and yet the company, for example, gets patient level data to file as part of their, you know, licensing track.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I love hearing an Englishman about to move to America talk about freedom. So that's excellent. Now, this might be a tough one, but I think we can negotiate this skillfully. So, you know, MAPS had kind of I don't know if I want to call it a publicity problem, but the Mercer group donated a whole bunch of money, and it turned into a lot of heat. And similarly, some people who donated a large sum to UCSF kind of got a lot of attention. I really want to name them, but people can look it up. But you know, how do we negotiate these large philanthropic donations? Do they always come without strings attached or agendas attached to the donations, or is it whoever wants to take that one?
Well, I'll start because you mentioned Rebecca Mercer. So the only condition that Rebecca put on her $1 million donation over 4 years, which she's now completely made, was that it go for veterans. Mm-hmm. She didn't say that we couldn't make the data public or anything like that. And so I think that taking that donation was one of the most controversial things that I've done, and we did get a lot of criticism for it, but I think it's misplaced criticism. And I think what we've been able to do, I think all three of us, and Rachel as well, is that we've been able to make the healing properties of psychedelics a nonpartisan, bipartisan, above politics issue. It's about healing. And so for me to receive donations from across the political spectrum has been really important. I'm leaving tomorrow to do a workshop that Representative Dan Crenshaw, who's a Republican from Texas. It's a healthcare innovation summit that he has in Houston. He's got 5 different people from 5 different companies, different aspects of healthcare, and it's going to end up with me and Dan talking about MDMA for PTSD and psychedelics in general. So I think it's just very important that we keep this above politics and try to avoid the main reason for the backlash in the 60s, which was the association of psychedelics with the counterculture. And now we're trying to mainstream psychedelics. It's more about healing. We do have our political implications. Robin's got some criticism for some of his papers about the political impacts of some of these drugs, but I think it's super important that you publish that and that you study that.
There's an update.
Yeah. But that's what I think. We need to receive donations from everybody. And I did have, just last thing, a discussion with a Supreme Court justice. And I said, I wanted to ask his opinion about this donation from Rebecca Mercer. And he said that the essence of democracy is finding common ground with people on whom you may disagree on other issues. And so he said that it was exactly the right thing. So I have it on the Supreme Court is saying that I did the right thing.
I think you did too, Rick. And I didn't realize it was $1 million. By the amount of attention, you would think it was $60 million.
Well, if it was 60 million, I would still accept that.
Yeah, totally. So somebody needs to step up. Yeah. And Robin, do you want to give a little update on what you were?
Yeah. So 4 studies, including the recent depression trial versus 𝗍𝗪, healthy volunteer study, 𝗪𝗪𝗪 for the first time in your life, a naturalistic study, a couple of hundred volunteers, and the other one, I think it's data pulled from a population study data bank. And so the initial finding of a shift towards, you might say, loosely and broadly left-wing political persuasion isn't holding up anymore in a bigger sample and different samples. So, that early publishing, one was a big sample, naturalistic, and the other one was a very small sample, and in hindsight, probably too small to publish on. So anyway, that update is the nature of science. It's iterative, it's corrective, and it doesn't seem to be holding up. So that's being prepared for submission now. The other thing to say, though, is that we're interested still in the possibility of so effective polarization, the splitting, the hardening of camps, Republicans, Democrats, and how that seems to be, getting worse in terms of the severity of the polarization. It's just an interesting question, if you drop in a plasticity enhancer and your context then can sway you more easily, are certain anomalous phenomena, like, for example, I know it's terrible to pick one, but like a QAnon shaman, his echo chamber, you imagine his internet use is all kind of, that kind of alt-right sort of themes, and he seems to be interested in I don't know. So there's something around that, the context sensitivity of any shifting in political persuasion. But more briefly, the update is that the swing towards left-wing political persuasion doesn't actually seem to be holding up now in our data.
Robin, what about nature relatedness? Is that also not?
So that does, but I guess one factor here is the context and looking at how that interacts, and the assumption would be that when in nature, these feelings of closeness to nature, interconnectedness with nature are going to be more readily made, and whether the same could be true in a sterile lab environment injected with DMT, for example, is an interesting question. We shall see.
And Matt, I'm kind of curious, you've spoken about politics and psychedelics a bit, and I'm curious of your kind of comments on this previous conversation.
Yeah, so certainly looking forward to seeing the new data that Robin is mentioning. I had some critiques of the early evidence, and so it's interesting to hear that hasn't held up, and I think everyone has kind of had the QAnon shaman who's been mentioned as kind of the prototype of but what about the QAnon shaman? It's like there's always and to be clear, like any trend, even if it were found to be a reliable trend, there's always some fish swimming upstream as well, so something, so the example, flying in the opposite direction doesn't suggest there's not something there. But I think it's very my sense is that much more needs to be done as we delve into the nuance of what we, are actually what we're actually measuring. I recall and this was something that we put in published in a critique. The authors of the scale suggesting that that the anti-authoritarianism scale, which I don't think was the name, forgetting the name of it, but they didn't map cleanly onto I think they avoided liberalism because it didn't map cleanly onto to what that word means in U.S. politics, which is, these things get incredibly complex, when you have, authoritarian right-wing and left-wing examples, throughout history. So, and to me, I think, like nature relatedness, which we're actually seeing in some data we're working up from lab research right now. So that's cool. That appears to be holding up, robustly. I think a number of these things, my intuition is they certainly have to be an indirect effect. I mean, the serotonin 2A receptor does not push people towards, liking trees. It seems, but in terms of, I think this is probably mediated by the world, the idea that there are these powerful means in the world. We are influenced by context, and much of that, there's some self-validating truth out there. So, unfortunately, it seems to be arguable, but for a lot of folks, they don't think it's arguable that, the environment's important. It seems kind of obvious. We're all stuck on this planet together, and if the environment goes to hell, we're, up the creek without a paddle. So, in the context of increased plasticity of thought, plasticity of behavior that you get in these psychedelic sessions, that folks can really get the gestalt, the big picture, they could really get what that is in a big way, and they've heard it before. The same way they can get in a cancer patient, for example, that, oh, I'm creating so much of my own suffering in my reaction to the cancer diagnosis. I could still be making plans. I could still get outside. I could still be with my grandkids, but I'm creating more of my suffering. They've told themselves, many of these people, so many times, but a good psychedelic session just hits them in the heart with it in such a strong way, because there is a truth out there. There really are good ideas in the world. That makes a lot of sense. Same thing with people quitting smoking. The idea that oh, I really can do this. I'm not, destined to be a smoker forever. It's going to pass. The cravings are going to pass. You could tell yourself this a million times. It doesn't make it happen. But and again, when people have a powerful psychedelic session, they just really feel it in their heart, so to speak. And they say it's one of these duh moments where they say, wow, I can actually just decide to quit smoking. It's I can, just like a cancer patient, I could choose to live while I'm still alive, and so in the same way, I think perhaps changes in politics can fall in that, connection to nature. And so much of this is sort of probably an indirect phenomenon, but it doesn't suggest it's not a valid phenomenon, because there's a lot of good ideas out there to be had that do make sense, we should take care of our environment. There's also some wacky ideas out there, and psychedelics can enhance those. Thus, we get QAnon shaman.
Matt and Robin, I've got a quick question for both of you about religion. So we've talked about politics, but what about this idea that sort of a mystical experience, mysticism is the antidote to fundamentalism? So do you see that is something that psychedelic experiences, there's the religious leader study at Hopkins at NYU, that it moves people more from literalism, fundamentalism, to a deeper shared sense of spirituality throughout the religions? Do you think that that's somehow similar to this, or different from the idea of political shifts?
My gut is that the jury is still out on that one, because there are certainly examples where people are pushed into fundamentalist ideas. Now, whether these are, rare enough exceptions that they really don't define the trend, I don't know. But, certainly, I mean, at the extremes, you have, Manson with brainwashing his family into a pretty fundamentalist extreme view, that the idea this race war is coming, that they had to play their role, and that like as far out there as you could possibly imagine. And I think very call it fundamentalist. And, you know, other examples of sort of, you know, guru-like religions that can pop up surrounding psychedelics. And I'm not, you know, some of the, it's kind of hard to draw this connection because we're jumping across cultures, but I suspect so many of the shamanic-based cultures would be considered fundamentalist in certain ways from our culture's perspective. So I'm not sure. I mean, many of these societies have strong patriarchal belief systems, you know, a lot of moral judgments, you know, things that we would associate with right-wing ideology in our culture. So I'm not sure. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it's a hard one, and it arguably comes back to the question of, are psychedelics in and of themselves intrinsically healing, or are their therapeutic effects dependent on the contextual manipulation, the preparation, therapeutic support? And it's a tough one, isn't it? Because there are occasions, I mean, we talk of the inner healer and so on, that it looks like, and this isn't invoking any supernaturalism, it looks like there's some kind of interesting self-organized healing processes, and our bodies do heal themselves when we're injured. So it's not so wacky to think that there could be, you know, the general direction of travel is towards healing, you know, it directly through the drug action. And some of the realizations that you'll see in terms of a spiritual, mystical type experience, connection with nature and so on, could be seen in a similar way, like it's a remembering, you know, of stuff forgotten. Once all the clutter of modernity and analytical thinking is gotten out of the way, we see things clearly again and simply. And yeah, so there's some interesting parallels, and the theme of uncertainty, tolerance of uncertainty, is part of arguably, you know, a good therapeutic container and context, that perhaps you don't always need a hard and black and white and absolute answer to everything from your experience and experiences.
It's a lot to think about here between you two. It was a great question, Rick. Sounds like you were at Esalen recently, but next question around the what is this? The modern world secrecy oath, the NDA, and like how does this is, it's an important tool, right? Non-disclosure agreements are really important in business. It's important in a lot of reasons. You know, when I have certain people come over my house, they sign an NDA. Not really, but you know, how do we want to look at NDAs? Like I have the sense that there's some really broad and aggressive NDAs out there that are impeding science a bit.
Yeah. I'll start just by saying very simply that we don't use them because we don't have intellectual property in that same way. You know, we're not relying on patents. We are relying on what's called data exclusivity, which is for incentives for developing drugs that are in the public domain. So we can make all of our information public, and we value transparency. So we don't use NDAs. And some people that want to work with us ask us to sign NDAs about their information. Occasionally we'll do that. Usually I try to say, I don't want to sign them. Just don't tell me what you don't want me to share, and just tell me what you do want me to share. But I think that there is a lot of potential problems with NDAs, and at least from my sense, again, because we're funded not by investors, but by donors, we're more wanting to help the whole field and not corral information.
Yeah, I talked to a few friends at Mass General, and they are psychiatrists in that group, the psychedelic research group there, and they claim to not have to sign any NDAs whatsoever. And I was actually surprised based on the groups they're working with. And I don't know, right? Robin, do you have any thoughts on this NDA and university topic?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really like them. Yeah, I wish there was, but you know, it's maybe academics are especially naive. But the spirit is one of collaboration, and I think I've learned that more and more over the years. Just the kind of, if you want to get a bit sort of Machiavellian about it, it's win-win anyway to share. You give and you get more back. So that whole protective thing, yeah, I don't like it. I kind of wish they didn't exist, but is that terribly naive? Maybe it is.
Right. It's an interesting project, and there's huge data sets out there that are private, and researchers don't have access to them. And often it's incentive based. Like, I want to be the first to publish here, and I don't want people to see what I'm working on. So I'm going to hold this data for a few years until I'm published.
Yeah, I guess there's a bit of that. I mean, our brain imaging work, I would like to say, judge us on just how many collaborations we have. Yeah. Some people argue we've overworked those data sets, but there's always another way to describe the data, using a different angle that I think advances your understanding. So I don't know if all our data's in a repository, but more or less whenever anyone comes to us, we data share for the purposes of getting it into the public domain. Maybe there's room for improvement there, but you sort of have a period of exclusivity where you have your data you're publishing on it. I think that's somewhat understandable.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's, my observation and frustration often with the psychedelic field is it feels really slow. Rick's been at this for a very long time, and it has to feel like it's going at a snail's pace at times, Rick, right? But we're seeing massive progress.
Yeah, well, that was political resistance, struggles to raise the money, resistance by journals to publish the data. There's been resistance at every level, but now it feels like that's pretty much gone, and now things are accelerating at a dramatic rate. Yeah,
absolutely. The last 3 years have been crazy.
I wanted to throw in regarding the NDA, academics that are listening, just, we are suckers, like by, it's like stay in school forever,
look what industry just did to them.
Yeah, with no guarantee of job security. And you're willing to get sucked into a pyramid scheme that we call academia. Like, okay,
my conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Exactly. And we're kind of wired that way. It's like, of course we want to better the world.
What he was going to say was, don't sign them. We'll see if he says that.
Yeah. So
that's where he was headed.
So be very careful. Don't sign something without at least getting a lawyer. Don't just sign things that people, companies put in your face. I advise several companies.
Robin, have you ever refused to sign NDAs, and then what happens?
It's been really slow, but I do have lawyers that look at them now.
I've never had a contract that you suggest to change where there's not at least some willingness to change it. They might come back and don't treat it like your iTunes, click here to agree to use our product thing. Have a lawyer look over it. And I mean, this gets tricky. I mean, folks some of these, if you read it, they'll have you keeping secret everything about psychedelics is all of a sudden theirs. It's like, okay, well, you're also doing work in this area and talking lots of people. So you have to really drill down to that language. It's like, okay.
It's not coming back. At least not right away.
Yeah, if the company comes up with something that they truly have IP on that they don't want public, like sure,
well,
but that's
as long as we're have a moment here, I'll just say that the beauty between the difference between patents and data exclusivity, which is important, is that patents are you own a certain amount of data, and then a certain invention. If anybody wants to market stuff like that, if you've got a patent on it, they can't do it. So the difference between patents and data exclusivity, which I like so much, is that we have exclusive use of our own data, and it blocks some competitors from using our data to market a generic. In the US, it'll end up being effectively 6 years, and in Europe, it's 10 years, plus potentially you do another indication 11 years. But with data exclusivity, other people can generate their own data. And in fact, when we publish our data, that makes it easier for them to understand how to design their studies and how to generate their own data. So while we will plan to have exclusive use of our data and we'll plan to make money on that, we will maximize public benefit, not profit. What that actually means in practice, we're still trying to figure it out. But we're not blocking anybody from doing anything. So that's why I really am comfortable with using data exclusivity.
To transition to another fun topic. So is it the psychedelic or is it therapy? And I think this is a really big topic, right? I'm a somewhat orthodox Graphian, right? So like, we have the capacity to heal, as Robin was saying, you know, wound, psychic wound, whatever. We have the capacity to heal ourselves. And in some cases, you can heal yourself without a therapist there, but largely we're seeing the most benefit in these guided sessions with therapists present and part of this long protocol. How do we like to talk about this publicly and make a differentiation, Robin? If you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine we're probably in agreement that we can make it an empirical question. I talk about psychedelic therapy, as I think the others do, as a combination treatment. It's not drug alone, it's not therapy alone, it's how they come together. We assume that there's a synergy there. We could do a bit more science actually to demonstrate it, but that'll be coming. Gosh, I think I had something else to say, but it slipped my mind. So maybe.
Well, I'll slip in and say, you said, Robin, it's an empirical question. So I'll say that our recently published phase 3 study in Nature Medicine was therapy with inactive placebo versus therapy with MDMA. So it's a perfect comparison of. So with therapy, we had 32% of the people no longer had PTSD at the 2-month follow-up. So therapy works, but when you combine therapy with MDMA, we got 67% no longer had PTSD. Yeah. Now, we don't do MDMA without therapy because we don't think it's ethical, because people have had negative reactions to, we've all heard stories about people, well, I've heard loads of stories. People take MDMA at raves, difficult emotions come up. They're not in a position to deal with it. They suppress their emotions, their feelings, and they're worse off for months or years afterwards. So we don't think it's ethical to take people that are suffering significantly from a clinical diagnosis of whatever it happens to be, and just give them the drug. On the other hand, with legalization, and just because I'll try to slip this in the last minute or so that we do think that people should have legal access to this, and even people with diagnoses should be able to try self-healing or recreation or whatever. But I think there'll be a higher risk in that. There'll be more negative reactions. We need more honest drug education, harm reduction, peer support, peer drugs, treatment on demand. But I do think that the psychedelics in themselves are best understood as tools, like what Robin was talking about as neuroplasticity, or, promoting of plasticity. But how that gets channeled depends on the context. And so therapy is essential. And for the approval of MDMA post, if it's approved for prescription use, we are proposing to FDA and the DEA that it never be administered without therapy, that it always be administered with therapy. It's never a take-home drug. And I think one of the weaknesses of 𝗍𝘀𝗃 and 𝗶𝗏𝗏 for depression is that it was approved without therapy as a pharmacological drug in and of itself. And there's about 300 ketamine clinics in America right now. And I think more and more of them are realizing that if they combine it with therapy, it's better for the patients. It's not so good for the pharma company because then you need less ketamine. But I do think that the combination of drug with therapy is the way it's going to go forward in insurance-covered post-approval prescription use.
Thanks, Rick. Matt, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the evidence that's emerging regarding really the big question in psychedelic therapy is what's the biology that explains long-term therapeutics, and I think the answers are ultimately going to converge with the idea that
we can't hear Matt. If you're hearing him, we can't hear him.
I can.
I think we're good. It's something weird on your end, Rick. I don't understand.
Okay,
Matt.
Yeah,
okay.
I think the essentially psychedelic psychotherapy works because it is psychotherapy and it's psychotherapeutic process, drawing from the common factors that we know are at play and predictive of success outside of, psychedelic therapy. These common factors such as the rapport with the clinician, such as the some shared framework with the clinician and the individuals, whatever that is, a path towards healing. So these kind of common factors really explain psychedelic therapy. Psychedelics are great at enhancing those. I think both acutely while someone's on them and likely in the so-called integration phase where, it seems a decent bet there's some of the neuroplasticity that's unfolding that we know is going on in rodents. So I really think it's part and parcel of like how they're exerting their long-term efficacy, because people are learning things from these experiences in this, more akin to the way they learn something from life or from therapy. We're not used to asking the questions, cognitive behavioral therapy works, and a year later they're less depressed or they're less likely to smoke. What changed in the brain because of the cognitive behavioral therapy? What changed in the brain because of, what have you, motivational enhancement therapy or whatever, or systematic desensitization for phobias? Clearly there's presumably always a biological mediation there. Like if there's a change in psychology and behavior, there's a change in the brain. But we're more primed to require those and to want to know those answers for something that is a medication. We should want it across the board because it all complements each other, and there's always going to be a biological and psychological side to every story. Two sides of the same coin. But I think that's why one of the reasons in the big picture psychedelics are so exciting. Outside from their own potential, I think they just have a potential to transform the way we think about psychiatry, putting more psychology back into psychiatry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's sort of a revitalizing the biopsychosocial model, a more holistic model of mental health.
Exactly.
And because we're, most of the thought leaders, I think it's fair to say, are on the same page about this. I do think, even though there is an upscale in use,
we'll need to wrap in just a moment, Robin. Sorry.
Okay, maybe we have a cultural setting now that's better educated, and the risks are really in the sort of outlier, anomalous adverse events, and you can imagine those going up if you don't have the therapeutic container.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to wrap here. I'd have all sorts of fun commentary, but we need to jump into our breakout rooms. Robin Carhart-Harris, Matthew Johnson, Rick Doblin, thank you so much for a lovely panel. Everybody can join a breakout room if you've signed up for that. I believe they're on the left-hand side, and we'll see you all there. Thank you all for being part of this lovely panel.
Thank you all.
Thank you.